Today we're going to be watching a video where an atheist gets questions he allegedly can't answer. The atheist in question is Christopher Hitchens, so of course he can answer and likely does answer very well, but the people who are responding to it in this video don't seem to understand his answers and therefore think he is terrible. Now, sometimes Hitchens was not the best debater, but that's okay. You don't have to be necessarily. So let's see if we can answer it if he can't, and see what we can make of this.
If you want to get a good person to do an evil thing, you make him religious.
What do you mean by good? Where does good come from?
My sail is coming from the same place as your wind.
So I must point out, before we get anywhere with this, that those were spliced together. That was not the answer he gave to that specific question, as far as I'm aware. Unless this guy spliced together completely different things later on, that is not the answer Hitchens gave to that question. So already we're getting into some very, bare false witness territory, but let's continue.
You'll see his ability to answer a question with an insult in a way where it feels emotionally like the question has been answered, even though it actually hasn't been. With that being said, let's dive in.
Okay, so he didn't answer the question with an insult. He answered it by asking another question using a long-winded story. That is a perfectly valid way to answer something. If you think a question is a bad question, you can point out why it's a bad question by pointing to something similar that's also a bad question in a more obvious way. Is that the most satisfying or direct way to answer? Well, no. But you don't have to be satisfied to get an answer. An answer is an answer. Do I like it sometimes? Well, sure, because it can be funny. Is it always a good way to answer? Well, no, of course not. Would I do it? Maybe not in this instance. I would probably be more direct, but I digress.
I'd like to ask you a question that I think Leibniz brought up many years ago. If there is no God, why does anything exist?
Okay, before he goes on this long-winded ramble he is about to go on, which I would not do in his position, I just want to say, the answer to the question for me is, I don't know why things exist. I don't know why the universe is here. I don't know if there is a why. I just know things exist. That's about as far as it goes. This knowledge is, from all I can tell, forbidden to me. The question, the answer of, like, why? Why is there anything at all? And the answer does not have to satisfy us. Again, we don't have to be satisfied by the answer, and we shouldn't expect the universe exists in any way to satisfy us. I've got a friend who I asked this question because one night I was walking through Brooklyn thinking, man, it's kind of weird that anything exists at all, no matter what actually happened, whether a god created it, or it just popped out from nothing, or whether it was always here. It's a very odd thing to think about. And I was talking to my friend, and I said that, and she said, well, I like to think of it like this. Stuff probably exists because it's impossible for things to not exist. And that, for a human, is a very unsatisfying answer to the question. But it is an answer to the question, and I think it's a good one. Do I think that's necessarily true? Well, no. But it is a good answer, even if it's not a satisfying one, because I don't think that there is a satisfying answer to the question of, why does anything exist? We can't really say why. We can say how, but I think why is something that is forever sealed off from humanity. I don't think we can answer such a question.
We both have this Navy background.
Yes, sir.
In Portsmouth, where I'm from, there's an old story about a young man taking his captain's examination before a board of admirals. And they say to him, right, your ship is on a lee shore. It's being driven by whatever wind towards the rocks. What are you going to do to get out of this terrible position? He says, I would pile on an extra sail and pull the stern hard to starboard and hope by this means to escape to save the ship. And they said, well, very well, but there's the wind is still blowing, the gale is coming at you still, and the rocks are getting nearer. Now what are you going to do? So I put on more sail and keep the helm hard down to starboard and maintain this position. But yes, but the wind is still blowing you, and the gale force has increased, and the rocks are getting near. Now what are you going to do? And he said, well, I'd cram on extra sail and keep the helm hard down to starboard. One of the admirals, with rather red-faced exasperation at this point, says, where are you getting all this extra sail from? And the young captain says, well, the same place you're getting all that extra wind from. Now, either a priori you believe in a creation.
Okay, before he continues, I just want to say that was kind of like a terrible story. He probably should have rehearsed that one beforehand. And, I mean, if he'd told it better, it might have landed better, but I really don't see the relevance regardless.
Story, or you do not. I'll just have to say it. I'm one of those people who's meant by Pascal when he says he's writing his Pensées to those who are so made that they cannot believe. You have to include me in that. I don't believe in a creator. I don't believe I'm supervised. I don't believe that a being set the universe in motion, and I
Well,
don't know it.
then how is it set in motion?
See, he does actually answer the question there. It's just that the person who made this video doesn't understand his answer. His answer is essentially that I don't believe there really is a why, and frankly, neither do I. But there is the question of why. I mean, humans have that question. We like to think in terms of why does this happen? Why does that happen? It's very useful in our universe. But when it comes to the question of the universe itself, well, the question's utility becomes a lot less, I guess you could say, plausible. I don't think that the question has as much utility as other questions within the universe, if we are talking about what came before it. The plausibility of why as a question for the existence of the universe is itself in question. This is what Christopher Hitchens was trying to say, but of course he got interrupted.
And I don't know any physicist who does, and I'm not a physicist
I quoted
myself,
a lot of
but
them
I'm saying
already.
if you and I had been having this argument in the 18th century.
Oh yeah, one more thing before we go on. He did say, I mean, Frank Turek said, where does good come from a second ago? As if, good is something that exists subjectively. Now, subjectively, humans have various ideas of what is good, but there really isn't any universal idea of good per se. Even in religion, ideas of good vary very strongly. For example, is it good to stone a gay person? If you're in the Middle East, I would say a considerable portion of people would say yes. If you're in Israel, I would say there would be a much lower percentage of the population that would say yes. I think if you're in a place like America, even lower still. However, they all come from the same source. I mean, these are all Abrahamic religions. They all have the same sorts of, they all have the same sorts of proscribed punishments against being gay. They all have that in there. But yet, they all have different extents to which they play out based on their societal evolution and differences. If you have a Frank Turek on stage and ask him, should gay people be stoned to death for being gay, his answer would be, well, of course not. That's silly. But that is in the Bible that he believes. No less than it is in the Quran, which a Muslim believes in, let's say, Saudi Arabia, and takes to its fullest conclusion. So when it comes to questions of good, religion doesn't really give us any solid answers on that. I mean, Moses brings down some tablets, and on these tablets, one of the things is, thou shalt not kill. But it's kind of, thou shalt not kill with an asterisk, because what happens next? Well, he brings the tablets down, he finds that they are sacrificing to a golden calf or something like that, and he just immediately kills thousands of them. I'm sorry, there's something in my eye. It's not very fun. But I'm going to try to fight through it anyway. And yeah, there are repeated genocides in the Old Testament that are commanded by God. So when it comes to the question of good, where does good come from? Well, good comes from humans. It doesn't come from a man in the sky. It doesn't come from religious books. We can go by those religious books, but even people who believe those books have very different interpretations of what they mean. Some Christians, no doubt, think that gay people should be, stoned to death or thrown in jail. Many of them don't believe that. Many of them believe that gay people are fine but shouldn't get married or have kids. Some people believe it's fine for gay people to have kids but not get married. Some people believe it's fine for gay people to get married. So even among Christians, you have vast, vast differences. Christians and Jews and Muslims too. So you can't really say for sure where good comes from in any grander sense. Like, you can't say that there is a grander sense. So you can't say there's an objective anything to the idea of good. Good and evil are human values. These are things that we have created. These are not objective things. You can extend this to literally anything. Like, why is it bad to kill someone, in my opinion? Well, because I know I wouldn't like to be killed. That's empathy. That's where a lot of this stuff comes from, basic empathy. I wouldn't like to be killed, so I would hope that nobody would want to kill. Or I would think that nobody should kill. Because it's kind of bad to do that, it seems like. Doesn't it? I mean, I can't say that dying would be a bad thing, but pain is a bad thing. I might experience pain during the dying process. I guess death would be a bad thing in the sense that it deprives me of a future that I could otherwise have and enjoy and love and appreciate. So all of these things you can answer like logically or emotionally, but you can't really answer with any kind of like divine sense, in my opinion. You can't answer them in any objective way. Even when it's claimed that there are objective things, you find a whole lot of subjectivity in that. You find a whole lot of asterisks in there. Like the, genocides commanded in the Old Testament, well after thou shalt not kill. It's all very conditional in religion. Let's not forget that.
You'd be saying that I should recognize Jesus as my personal savior, and you wouldn't have heard of the Big Bang.
I would have heard of...
And you don't convince me...
What does that have to do with the question?
I'll just have to say this. You don't convince me that there's any connection between your faith and any scientific observation.
There's a difference between proof and persuasion.
I'm not here to debate physics, and I'm not competent to do so.
Okay, so you don't have an answer for that, how the universe came into existence out of nothing.
Yeah, so that's actually a good point. Like, Hitchens is not a physicist, and if you're asking where the universe came from, that is, in fact, a question he is not qualified to answer. It is not a bad answer to say, I am not qualified to answer this question. He doesn't have to be qualified to answer this question to say that whether he understands how the universe came about or not, your answer to the question, Mr. Turek, is not a satisfying answer in the least, and actually avoids a lot of these issues. It's the God of the gaps thing all over again. You know, the God of the gaps is the idea that the gaps in human knowledge can be filled with God and his works. And that has been wrong every single time it has been done in human history.
Nothing.
No more than you do, no.
Let's move to a second question.
If all space, all matter, and all time had a beginning, the cause must be outside of space, matter, and time.
You don't know how it happened, and neither do I.
Correct. Hitchens is correct here. Turek is wrong. We don't know that that's how things happened, and also, on top of that, how could we say that there had to be something to create it if it came into existence? Obviously, he's going like the Kalam cosmological argument sort of thing, where it's, if something had a beginning, it had to be created by something that doesn't have a beginning. But I don't think the fact that something has a beginning means it has to be created by something without a beginning. I don't think that we have proven that leap. And that's really a problem with all these sorts of like apologetic arguments. You may as well just make the claim outright and just avoid all of the fancy legwork in terms of, you know, these sorts of like point A, point B, point C conclusion sorts of things. Because like with the Kalam cosmological argument here, which is what he's using, if you'll notice, they rely on a lot of ifs. I mean, if this is true, and if that's true, and if this other thing is true, then this other thing must also be true. But first of all, we haven't proven that the first, second, or third thing is true. They're all still if questions, and we have not yet linked those things to the final conclusion that they're making in these cases. If you're familiar with the argument, you'll know what I'm talking about. But if you're not, you probably think I sound kind of crazy.
Okay.
Well, now this is important, Dr. Taylor, because in his book, Christopher Hitchens on page 70 says that he knows that this happened without God. That's what you said. It works without God. So how does it work without God?
No, I'm sorry. I think you must be quoting my quotation from Laplace.
No,
am I not correct?
No. Page 70.
Laplace says it works without that assumption, yes.
Here's what you say. You say, however, and critically, we can now do this while dropping, or even if you insist, retaining the idea of God, but in either case, the theory works without that assumption. So how does it work without that assumption?
I'm repeating, first, as you'll notice, I say you can retain the idea if you like. It has no explanatory value. But it works without the assumption as well as it works with it.
How does it work without?
And I'm quoting...
Well, I mean, it sure is a curious thing that the universe seems to work exactly as you'd expect it to work if there were no God. And in fact, it's very perplexing to most people, even Christians, that the universe works the way it does if God exists. Whereas, as an atheist, to me, the universe just seems to work how it should work if God isn't there. It's when you add God to the mix that things get a little bit more confusing, because you have all these things all of a sudden, like the problem of evil, for example.
I'm referring back to what the great astronomer and physicist Laplace said when asked by the emperor, when he'd shown him his working model of the universe, and the emperor said, well, there doesn't seem to be a God in this.
Laplace was centuries ago, Christopher. We've advanced in physics since then. We know other things.
Said, Your Majesty.
Yes, we have advanced considerably in physics since then, and lo and behold, God's hand is still not seen orchestrating this universal stuff at all.
It works without that assumption. I'm simply re-quoting him, and I'm saying, and you can retain the idea if you like. You're not going to convince me, and I don't think you've convinced anyone in the audience, that you know very much more about the origins of the universe than they did.
The question is asked, if there's no God, then why does anything exist? And there simply is not an answer given to that question, but there's a reframing of the question. There's a parabolish.
No, daily dose of wisdom. There was an answer given, and that answer was, Hitchens said, I don't know. I'm not a physicist, and even if I were, it's probably impossible to know such a thing as why the universe exists. He said he didn't know why the universe exists. He said he's not qualified to say even how the universe exists. Why is that a problem? Is it really that much of a problem to say, well, I don't know, but I also don't think you know? I mean, that's a large part of what it is to be an atheist, to be a skeptic. It's not that we have concrete, for-sure knowledge that God does not exist. It's that we're saying, we don't know, but what you're saying seems a lot more unlikely than the other explanations.
Banal platitudinal story that's given about the wind and the sail. This is a classic reductionism. It's when you focus only on the mechanism and not at all on the agency. It would be like saying that a car engine can be properly, sufficiently explained by breaking down the mechanisms that bring about the combustion within the engine, but that is only the how. It does not explain the why. In order to
There probably is no why. That is a very unsatisfying answer, but that is essentially the answer Hitchens was giving, and likewise, that is probably the answer that I would be giving also. It's just that, there is no why. That's just, it's not satisfying to our human faculties that there is no why, but there is no why. Sorry, my guy.
explain the why, you have to also bring in the engineer, who is the agent. So you need both mechanism and agency to have a proper explanation of why is there this car engine? How did it get there? That is how God
A car engine is something humans made. We cannot say that the universe was made in the same way that a car engine was made. That is a big problem. I mean, this guy can look at a car engine and know that humans made it. We cannot simply look at the universe and know that a god made it. We can't do that because we have naturalistic explanations of these things that work just fine without the hand of God. I really don't understand why he can't see this. It doesn't seem that difficult to understand.
actually helps to explain the things that we see within the universe. With that being said, let's go ahead and dive back.
No, it doesn't. Adding God into the mix doesn't help explain a single thing, actually. It only obfuscates our reality and how it works, as it has since the dawn of human history. Ever since the idea of God came, it has only served to confuse us and distract us from the answers to the real questions. I mean, think about how there were gods for everything a couple thousand years ago. Every force of nature humans didn't understand went down to, well, it must be the gods. If there's a thunderstorm, well, that must be the god of thunder. If there's a storm at sea, well, that must be the god of, sea storms. If there's if you're having a rough day at work, it must be the god of rough days at work. And that's not like good answering. It's not a good way to answer things. And we have shown that it's not, because as time has gone on, we have learned that, in fact, there is a hydrological cycle that determines in large part how storms work. There is a thing called a boss that we have found out really sucks and makes working environments terrible. We have discovered naturalistic explanations for these things, and we continue to at every single turn. The origin of life, the origin of human life, I'm specifically talking about in this case, Adam and Eve. The origin of human life was not a man coming down from the sky, magic man coming down from the sky, and then assembling a man out of dust or whatever, mud, clay, if you want to go there, whatever, and just breathing the breath of life into him, then taking a rib and making a woman out of him. That's not how that happened. We know evolution is how that happened over billions of years. The universe did not arise from somebody saying, let there be light. In fact, there was a big bang. Massive one. The biggest bang, the hugest bang we've ever seen. We love our big bangs, don't we, folks? I don't know where Trump came from and all this, but I'll take it. And at every point that we have put God in the equation to solve something, what happens is God always ends up being irrelevant to it. And likewise, if there is such a thing as a why for the universe, God won't be there either. We can be pretty sure about that. Why would God be hiding in the last place you're going to look? It doesn't make much sense, does it? The universe just happens to work through a series of natural laws, and then God's just hiding behind them. Isn't that really silly? Isn't that really curious? Don't you think he'd work that out some other way?
Back in.
Mr. Hitchens,
Yes.
would you like to ask a question of Dr. Turek?
Yes, I'd like to ask him what kind of Christian he is, and who are and who are not Christians in his view, who claim to be.
I'm a non-denominational Christian. I believe that anyone who believes that Jesus died and rose again for their sins is a Christian.
As simple as that. So it doesn't matter to you whether someone's a Catholic or a Mormon?
No. Mormons don't believe what I just said. Mormons have a works theology. Catholics There's a debate over whether Catholics have a works theology. Recently, Benedict has said no. So, yeah, that's fine.
Can I?
So notice how Frank Turek kind of like tried to qualify that very heavily. He's like, "Oh well, I'm a non-denominational Christian. Anybody who believes in Jesus is my homie." But then he's like, when he's asked about the Mormons, he's like, "Well, no, because they have a works-based system." But hey, it's literally like the you know what they call Mormons officially? It's the LDS Church, which is short for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Jesus Christ is in the name. That's definitely who they worship. They may have a work sort of system, but they do believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead and justified humanity. So, you know, I think like that sort of like he tried to hide something there and it didn't go like how he planned it. And when he refers to the Catholics, he's like, well, there are some questions there. He did say that he does believe that Catholics are Christians, which is good, I guess. I don't really care, but he did seem to imply that. But he did say, well, there is some controversy there. There has been some controversy there. That's putting it mildly, isn't it? Because if you go to the average Christian, the average Protestant Christian, and you ask them, so are Catholics Christians? They're going to be like, well, hell no. But let's continue.
Am I allowed to ask without cheating, to rephrase the question in a different way, very crisply?
Very crisply.
Suppose I was a baby being born in Saudi Arabia now. Would you wish me to be brought up as a Wahhabi or as an atheist?
Absolutely an atheist. I'm with you on that.
Good. Okay, thanks.
Now, that's interesting because when he asked William Lane Craig the same question, William Lane Craig did the exact thing this guy is accusing Hitchens of doing, and he just like avoided the question entirely and was like, yeah, I don't care. I don't know. Just to be clear, you know, Wahhabism is a very violent strain of radical Islam that is responsible for a large amount of terrorist attacks and wars all over the world. And yeah, it's a bad thing to be. And obviously, if you're an atheist, is a much better thing to be than that, which is what made it astounding that William Lane Craig was like, well, I can't really say. I mean, I don't know. He did a lot of that. I mean, during the debate with Hitchens, like, it seems like William Lane Craig is really good at avoiding any question that makes him the least bit uncomfortable, which that one does. But I gotta say, I am kind of like impressed that Frank Turek was just like so direct here. But obviously, I would suspect that probably people like Frank Turek are a little bit Islamophobic, so that probably does factor in. He probably likes atheists a little bit more than he likes Muslims. Probably factors in. Can't say it for sure, but it seems at least likely, doesn't it?
Wouldn't you?
Wouldn't I? Were you seriously asking me?
Second question. Please be brief.
Be brief.
Be brief. And for response, please be brief.
Oh, obviously.
You mentioned that you have all these moral issues with Christianity. Where do you get your morality from if we're just molecules in motion? What is morality?
Empathy, logic, reason. Those are all good places to get your morality from, if I'm keeping this answer short.
Who says we're just molecules in motion?
You're a materialist. What else could you be?
We're fairly highly evolved primates who have an innate need for and recognition of human solidarity. You can call that morals if you wish. I think I would. It's only good people, but a lot of people, they say made in the image of God, are born as psychopaths and sociopaths. They don't feel this need. Indeed, they enjoy violating it. I don't know where that fits in, particularly to God's plan, but it's been put like this. Left to themselves, good people will do as much good as they can. Wicked people will do as much ill as they can. If you want to get a good person to do an evil thing, you make him religious.
What do you mean by...
That's a very good stock line, and I have to wonder, like, I mean, Daily Dose of Wisdom, I hate to say it, I really don't like to be mean, but Daily Dose of Wisdom does not seem like a very smart kind of cat. And the reason I say that is because Hitchens has actually given a couple of really good answers here. He has given some bad ones. He has kind of like equivocated where he maybe shouldn't have. But on the whole, Hitchens hasn't done bad here. I mean, it's not the best he's ever done, and I think if you're against Frank Turek, you could do a lot better. Probably you watching this, if you're an atheist against Frank Turek, you could probably do a lot better than Hitchens did here. But Hitchens did okay, and that was actually a pretty good answer to that question, wasn't it? I mean, when it comes down to it, who decides laws? Is it the Bible? Is it the Torah? Is it the Quran? No, it's humans. And we know this because, like, do any two societies really have the same, like, set of laws derived from religion? I mean, even the strictest of, like, radically Islamic societies that are based in Sharia law, they have very different interpretations and understandings of Sharia law themselves. So it doesn't matter where your source comes from, it's still based in some way or another in human understanding. And I think it would be very silly to forget that point. And Hitchens did a good job of pointing that out. And he gave his famous stock line about to have a good person do bad things, it takes religion. And yeah, that's pretty true. I mean, I'm not sure if it does necessarily. I think good people do bad things all the time. But to make a good person do truly horrendous things, yes, it does take religion. There are plenty of otherwise decent people who have, because of religion, done some really gnarly, nasty, sinister stuff. And so, yeah, very good quote. So it's very perplexing that Daily Dose of Wisdom would just like leave this in here when it's a good answer. But maybe he doesn't recognize it as a good answer. But it is. It's a good answer. Not the best ever, but a good one. Sufficient. It works.
By good, where does good come from?
Dr. Turek, I believe that would be a third question, and we have two.
Well, it's...
So,
Same place.
Where does good come from? Empathy, rationality, logic, reason. Our human faculties determine what we as individuals think is good, and then as a society we debate what is good and come to conclusions that we can all agree on to some extent. Now, when I say we can all agree on, I don't mean all of us can agree, because on what do all of us actually agree? Pretty much nothing. If you ask almost any question, there will be about 20 to 25% of the population that completely disagrees with the other set of the population. Some issues are barely over the 50% mark. But eventually, because of the discourse, we do reach some understanding that a majority is in favor of this position and a minority is in favor of this position. And so that majority position usually becomes what we would call law, or the consensus view. Like, think about slavery in America. If you go back to, like, let's say 1830, how did the average person feel about slavery? Well, it probably wasn't 50-50. It was probably something like 65% in favor of slavery and then the others opposed. Now let's go to like 1855. You're getting a lot closer to the line here, the Civil War line. It's getting a lot closer, like 50-50. Maybe at this point, even a majority was against the institution of slavery. Probably not, but maybe they were. Now you get to, let's say, 1870. At this point, you probably have at least a plurality opposed to slavery. Let's go up to 1900. At this point in time, you probably have a pretty solid majority in favor of banning slavery entirely everywhere in the world. Come to the year 2024. Slavery is universally condemned in America, at least in the form that it took in what we fought over in the Civil War. That form of slavery in specific. Obviously, when it comes to like prison labor, attitudes are very much behind the times, or should. Well, I mean, behind the times in terms of, we view slavery as it was in the 1800s as very bad indeed, pretty much universally. But we are a lot more comfortable with other forms of slavery, like slavery in the prison system, for example. And so I think we're behind the times in that regard. I mean, we are against slavery, and yet we allow for one type of slavery. But eventually, with enough dialogue, with enough people like me and you talking about it, in 100 years or so, maybe the whole prison slavery thing will be abolished because it's obviously bad and it's obviously slavery. Maybe there will be a near 100% consensus on that, just like slavery today. It was humanity that made these decisions. It wasn't a God that made these decisions. We came to these conclusions ourselves through a lot of debate, a lot of hardship, and in the case of John Brown, some pretty cool action.
Trying to get him to answer the question.
Sir, my sail is coming from the same place as your wind.
Even here in attempted dismissal of objective morality, he brings in serial killers, but that is implicitly acknowledging God's moral standard. He's calling serial killers evil as opposed to good, and in doing so, he's referring to this third thing, this higher thing that you measure the behaviors of different humans against. To bring this to a
Serial killers are bad because they do things that we as a society recognize are bad. If it were legal for serial killers to just do what they do, what kind of a society would we have? You don't have to hold to some kind of biblical objective morality to say, well, a serial killer hurts society, so when we find them, we should throw them in jail and maybe do even worse than that to them. There is nothing perplexing about his answer. It's a perfectly reasonable answer, and it does not rely on objective morality to say it's bad. You can say, again, from an empathetic perspective, I, myself, would not like to be a victim of crime. Therefore, I would not like anybody else to be a victim of crime. If enough people who think this way come together to say, well, we shouldn't be victims of this crime because it hurts us, and we don't think anybody else should because it hurts them, then you essentially make up a rule that says, well, we don't allow that then. That's how society works.
Ahead, I'm going to quote C.S. Lewis, who says this very well. He says succinctly, "My argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has an idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe against when I called it unjust?" And so, to Hitchens, what are you measuring the behavior of a serial killer against when you call it unjust? What are you referring to make that determination, if not a higher third thing? And that moral law is what we're saying.
But then again, you run into the same problems over and over. Because thou shalt not kill, asterisk, thou shalt not kill unless somebody is gay or an adulterer or stuff like that. Thou shalt not kill unless God demands you take your son up onto a mountain and stab him through the heart. Now, in that particular case, thankfully, God changed his mind at the last moment, but there are other cases where that didn't happen. For example, I don't know how to say the name, so I'm not going to say it, but there is a guy who says that if God helps him win this battle, he will sacrifice the first thing that comes through his door. What's the first thing that comes through his door? Well, his daughter. In this particular case, God did not change his mind, and this man's daughter, after a couple months in the mountains to bemoan her virginity or whatever, is, killed ceremoniously. I mean, very unceremoniously for her, but ceremoniously for them, because that's what he promised to God, and God didn't have a problem with it. Thou shalt not kill, asterisk. If you have to qualify things this much, how can you say your morality is really objective? If there are these things, you can't really say that, can you? I mean, think about how many Christians support the death penalty, for example. Doesn't that violate the thou shalt not kill thing? I mean, think about it like this. Let's say that there is somebody on death row who pretty much everybody believes should go. Let's say Dylan Roof, for example. Not a great guy. Definitely somebody who I think most people would say, well, if anybody deserves to go, it's that guy. So we take him to death row, and we have him in the electric chair. I don't really know if that would be where he went, but they still have those in some states, I think. So let's say we take him to the electric chair. Now, the guy who throws the switch that takes Dylan Roof's life, are we not making him essentially a killer, a murderer? Are we not violating thou shalt not kill by performing this act? And yet, most Christians are fervent supporters of the death penalty or wars. I mean, it doesn't say thou shalt not kill unless somebody tries to kill you first. It doesn't say that. It just says thou shalt not kill, but it is conditional. Over and over, we see this in the Bible, and we see this in modern morality. If they really held to this morality as much as they say they do, a lot more Christians, fundamentalists, would be anti-death penalty or anti-war, but yet they are not. This is a pretty big problem, if you ask me, but I digress. So that's the atheist gets asked huge questions, can't answer debate highlight by Daily Dose of Wisdom. And if anything, I'm seeing a daily lack of wisdom here because Hitchens didn't give terrible arguments. I mean, not the arguments I would have given in this particular case, and I think that the example he used of the sales was kind of silly, but he didn't really answer very terribly at all, and in fact made some really great points there that I'm very curious why this guy would leave those in if he wanted to say, well, Hitchens did really bad in this debate, because some of these things actually make Hitchens sound really good and seem really good. But that's all we have for this video, so thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day, or night, or whatever it is there. I hope you have a great one.